the Holy, Undivided Trinity, the Three in One, and One in Three.
Amen.
Amen.
There are moments in life when we become acutely aware that we are living in the in-between. And I felt a lot of those moments deeply as I've been with you the last couple of weeks. I've spoken to several members of this community who are living between diagnosis and healing, between grief and hope. We're all living between who we were and who we are becoming. We feel that gap, especially this morning. Father Vincent is not at the altar with us because he is where he most needs to be with his family as Forrest continues toward healing. And we hold their family in our prayers, just like many others who are waiting for healing, trusting that even in this space between illness and restoration, it's not a place where God is absent. Perhaps many of you arrived today carrying your own between, waiting for test results, waiting for that hard conversation, waiting for clarity or justice or peace. In those seasons of waiting, time behaves strangely. Some days disappear in a blur, others stretch endlessly before us. We find ourselves groaning for the day when we'll finally reach the other side. I've been thinking a great deal about the strange nature of time this week, not only as I meditated on today's scriptures, but because my son Aiden and I spent a day on Tuesday wandering beneath the towering redwoods in Muir Woods. Like many of us who've seen these beauties, he became fascinated with the rings of the fallen trees. He would kneel beside a cross-section and begin counting. 14, he would say. That's my whole life, holding up a couple fingers to show just a short span. His entire life amounted to only a few inches of growth in a tree that had patiently been reaching toward the heaven for centuries. Then he noticed something else with awe. Around the base of those ancient giants were these tangled clusters of shoots, some green with new life, some already withering. These masses of shoots looked almost like redwood bushes springing up from the roots of the great tree. He walked over to one about as thick as his wrist and said, "This one could be my age too." Then he grew quiet. "If one of these keeps growing," he asked, "it will become the size of that one day, right? Hundreds of years from now." "Maybe," he said. He looked back up into the canopy and asked a question that has stayed with me all week. What will that tree see? Will it see the end of the world? Standing beneath those trees, time changes. We measure our lives by birthdays and careers, news cycles, elections, endless streams of breaking headlines. Redwoods measure life in centuries. Some standing today were already ancient when Francis of Assisi walked the hills of Italy. They've witnessed kingdoms rise and fall, wars begin and end, generations come and go. They remind us that God's work often unfolds on a timescale much larger than our own. I wanted to know more about the secrets of these trees, so unlike the weak and easily toppled Georgia pines I'm used to, so I read more about them this week. What fascinated me was learning that these giants don't stand because they have extraordinarily deep roots as I expected they might. It's quite the opposite. Their roots are surprisingly shallow. What keeps them standing through centuries of Pacific storms is that their roots spread outward, intertwining with the roots of their neighboring trees. They quite literally hold one another up. It struck me as a beautiful image for today, that forests endure what solitary trees cannot. These interconnected trees made me think of you. 2 years ago, I first walked into this community carrying a notebook and a stack of questions. I came as a researcher hoping to understand contemplative congregational life for my doctoral dissertation. I thought I was studying this community. I didn't realize this community was quietly growing me. Over these past 2 years, many of you have prayed for me, encouraged me, challenged me, and welcomed me again and again as I just keep coming back. Just a month ago, Father Vincent stood with his hand on my shoulder in the Cathedral of St. Philip in Atlanta as my bishop ordained me to the priesthood. And now here I am, presiding at the Celtic liturgy that first captured my heart when I stood among you as a visitor, and I can still hardly believe it. Like you, I find myself living in the gap. I'm ordained but not yet settled into my first call as associate rector of St. Paul's in Noonan, Georgia. I'm finished with seminary but only beginning to learn what it means to be a priest. I'm standing between one chapter and another. And that's exactly where Paul meets us this morning. He's writing to a church he's never visited, a community of Jewish and Gentile Christians trying to learn how to become one body in the heart of the Roman Empire. They're living under the shadow of imperial power, carrying old wounds and negotiating new identities, wondering how to follow Christ in a world that still looks nothing like the kingdom Jesus proclaimed. They know suffering. They know uncertainty. They know what it feels like to wait for God's promises to become visible. Paul doesn't minimize any of that. In fact, he widens the lens beyond the church itself. He says it's not only human beings who are waiting. The whole creation is waiting. The whole creation is groaning. Notice Paul says the whole creation has been groaning in labor pains until now. That really stuck out to me this week. That image matters. Paul does not say creation is groaning in death. He says creation is groaning in labor. There is all the difference in the world between those two realities because labor pain is different from the pains of death. Labor hurts, it exhausts, it makes you wonder whether you can keep going. But labor has direction. It is pain moving toward life. Paul tells us that the suffering at this present time isn't worth comparing to the kingdom that is coming, so we should have hope. Life is coming. For in hope we are saved, he says, as he explains that hope is believing in what is unseen, and we are to patiently wait for this already and coming kingdom. Which makes Jesus' parable we read today in the gospel all the more startling. This is a hard one. Matthew tells us that Jesus is sitting on a boat offshore, speaking to crowds gathered on the beach. He's begun announcing the kingdom of heaven has come near, but there's an obvious problem. If God's kingdom has truly arrived, why does the world still look so much like it did before? Why are Rome's armies still in power? Why do the righteous still suffer? Why do evil and goodness continue to grow side by side? Jesus answers not with an explanation, but a story, like he often does. A farmer sowing seed sows good seed in his field, but under the cover of darkness an enemy comes and sows weeds among the wheat. As the plants begin to grow, the servants notice a problem. Master, they ask, didn't you sow good seed? Then where did these weeds come from? When the farmer tells them an enemy has done this, they immediately offer a solution. Then do you want us to go and pull up the weeds? It's exactly what I would expect to do. Remove the problem, clean up the field, separate the good from the bad. But the farmer surprises them. No, he says, for in gathering the weeds, you would uproot the wheat along with them. Let both of them grow together until the harvest. Paul says creation is laboring. Jesus says, in effect, don't pull the weeds just yet. At first, those two teachings seem unrelated, but together, I think they reveal the same invitation. Someone said it earlier, patience. Trust God's timing. That's not the answer most of us want. If we're honest, most of us are far more like the servants in Jesus' parable. We look at the field and immediately ask, shouldn't we do something? Shouldn't God do something about the evil that seems so determined to choke out what is good? The question feels especially urgent in a week like this one, when we witness more immigrant families living in fear, when violence steals lives that bear the image of God in our country, when wars grind on, when our political life seems increasingly unable to see our shared humanity, when the earth itself groans beneath our feet in heat waves and fires. Shouldn't we do something? Many in Jesus' day were asking exactly the same question. Some longed for God to intervene dramatically, to judge Israel's enemies, to separate the righteous from the wicked once and for all. But Jesus consistently resists this kind of urgency. He insists the kingdom grows more like a seed than a revolution, quietly, patiently, almost imperceptibly, until one day the harvest reveals what has been happening all along. The servant's question is our question. Pastor, didn't you sow good seeds? Where did these weeds come from? Notice that Jesus never dismisses that question. The landowner doesn't pretend the weeds aren't there. He tells the servants they're overreacting. He doesn't tell them they're overreacting. He doesn't say everything is fine. But he names the reality plainly. An enemy has done this. There is evil. There is injustice. There are forces that oppose the flourishing of God's creation. The gospel never asks us to deny that. But the surprise comes in the answer to be patient and let both of them grow together until the harvest. The servants can be so eager to rid the field of weeds that they're willing to uproot the good wheat, the good work that's yet to be done. How often have we done the same? How often has our certainty become more dangerous than our compassion? How often has our desire to fix the world become a temptation to divide into those who belong and those who don't, those who are right and those who are wrong, and we surely are on the right side. We become so intent on identifying weeds that we forget our first calling is to cultivate wheat. Jesus isn't asking us to become indifferent to evil. He's asking us to become patient in a way that looks remarkably like God. The patience of God is not passive, it's not resignation, and it's not looking away. The patience of God is love, refusing to give up on what is still growing, on what still might be if we give it time. It is the confidence that God sees possibilities hidden beneath the soil we can't yet imagine. As I thought about this parable all week, I kept thinking back to those tiny shoots gathered around the base of those redwoods. Some of them would never become towering giants. Some would wither. Some would be broken by storms. When I looked at that tangled cluster of shoots, I assumed they were competing with each other. I told Aiden they must be jockeying for light and water, and the strongest would win and the others would die. But again, what I learned about redwoods told a different story. Long before those trees reach the sky, beneath the surface, the roots are already finding one another, intertwining, holding one another. Coastal redwoods often produce by sprouting from the root burl on the parent tree. And those circles of shoots we saw beneath are called fairy rings. I love that. Those little shoots are sharing their strength with one another. Even after one dies, it gains strength from after one dies, it gives strength to the other. I think there's something almost sacramental about that. One life giving rise to the many, a community rather than isolated individuals, and a slow, patient growth into maturity. Jesus tells us in this strange parable about wheat and weeds, that is how the kingdom grows too. Not with dramatic certainty and not all at once. It grows quietly and patiently. Growth is hidden beneath the surface long before anyone notices what God is doing. Perhaps that's why Paul speaks of hope in such unusual ways. He says, hope that is seen is not hope. For who hopes for what is seen? Hope's not optimism. It's not pretending everything is fine. Hope is not closing our eyes to suffering or refusing to name injustice. But hope is what allows us to look directly at the wounds of the world without surrendering to despair. Hope is what allows us to keep planting even when the harvest feels impossibly far away. Hope is what allows us to remain rooted when the storms come. That, I think, is what communities like St. Columba's have taught me. You've not turned away from the groaning of creation. You've listened to it. You've listened to the cry of the earth and the cry of the marginalized. You've cared for this watershed, welcomed the stranger, stood with those pushed to the margins, prayed deeply, and loved generously. Not because you believe you can fix the whole world, but because you trust that the Spirit is already at work within it. That is what it means to live by the Spirit, not escaping the world, but remaining faithfully rooted within it. It strikes me that redwoods do not survive by growing faster than everything around them. They survive by growing together. Their roots become so intertwined that one tree's strength becomes another's stability. That's why Paul never imagines the Christian life as a solitary one. Creation groans together. The church waits together. The Spirit intercedes for us together. We hold one another up until the storms pass. This is one of the reasons why this place has become so holy for me. When I first arrived, I thought I was coming to study contemplative formation. Instead, I found myself being formed by a contemplative people. You became part of the root system that has held me through discernment, through the long years of writing and graduation and ordination, and now into this strange, beautiful space before beginning at my first parish. I suspect many of you could tell similar stories about where you are right now. Only looking backward do we recognize the hidden ways God's been weaving our lives together. I believe that's why Jesus tells us to be patient. Not because the weeds don't matter, they do. Not because injustice doesn't demand our attention, it does. Not because suffering isn't real, it is. But because God's deepest work is often happening where we can't yet see it, beneath the surface, among the roots, in the slow work of grace. I keep thinking about Aiden's question, will that little tree see the end of the world? I don't know. Perhaps it will be standing long after every one of us has become part of the communion of saints. But I find myself wondering if Paul would gently answer or ask this question differently. No, Aiden, not the end of the world, the redemption of the world. Because that is the future toward which all creation is groaning. Not annihilation, but new creation. Not death, birth. Not despair, hope. And until that day comes, we are invited to grow in the gap, to become people whose roots run deep into one another. We are asked to become people who can bear the weight of one another's joys and sorrows. People who refuse to let fear have the final word. So if today you find yourself living in one of those in-between places, don't make the mistake of thinking it's God's absence. The roots are growing. Stop as we did for a few minutes in those quiet woods this week and take time to notice that grace is quietly spreading beneath your feet already. Become attentive to how God is doing what God has always done, bringing life where you can't see it. And one day, when we look back over the rings of our own lives, we may discover that what felt like the longest seasons of waiting were all along the years in which God was growing us the most into the people we needed to be. Amen.
Amen.